the following sounds nice. If you have any sort of musical education, you may know that these are referred to as octaves, fourths and fifths. And I want to make it absolutely clear that these names are so awful. No, really, they are just so bad. Because not only do they show a really striking Western bias in assuming that the octave can somehow be subdivided naturally into 8 notes, which is totally wrong, and if anything, the natural way to subdivide it would be into 5 notes, which is why the pentatonic scale is the cultural universal pretty much across the globe for all ancient civilizations. But moreover, it gives you the wrong way to think about music, because music and sounds are really just vibrations in air. So if you want to know whether 2 notes are going to sound well together, you need to think about whether their frequencies are going to interact nicely, whether the frequencies are going to match or synchronize in some kind of way. So in other words, you could imagine that you have 2 notes, and the second note vibrates twice as fast as the first one. Or in other words, every time the first note vibrates once, the other note is going to vibrate twice. We could call this something obvious like a 1 to 2 interval, and as it turns out, a 1 to 2 interval sounds very nice indeed. We could then go a step further and say, hey, what about a 2 to 3 interval? In other words, we have 2 sounds. Every time the first note vibrates twice, the other note is going to vibrate 3 times. And again, this sounds pretty nice. And then we can have a 3 to 4 interval, and by this point, I think you get it. I don't need to explain this anymore. We can in fact go even further and talk about all the other ones, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, and so on. But it turns out that the further you go, the more and more discordant these intervals become, and the less and less pleasant to the ear. But if we just stick to these first 3, it turns out that these 3 are precisely what classical musicians refer to as octaves, fifths, and fourths. So perhaps now you finally understand what they're talking about. To show why this other naming system is demonstrably superior, let me give you a little riddle, a little question. Let's suppose you start at a certain note and you go up by a fifth, and then you go up by a fourth. By how much have you gone up in total? Well, you might think 5 plus 4 is 9, so you've gone up by 9 notes, and that would be a very logical way of thinking, but no, that is wrong. The answer is an octave and you have failed. But let me ask this question in a different way. Let's suppose you start at a note, you go up by a 2 to 3 interval, then by a 3 to 4 interval. By how much have you gone up in total? Well, 2 to 3, then 3 to 4, you'd assume that the final interval you have is a 2 to 4 interval, which is the same as a 1 to 2 interval, in other words, an octave. You have now just understood why mathematically and physically this sounds nice. And there's not even 8 notes in an octave. If anything, there's 12, 13 if you're including